Welcome to the Generous Benefits Podcast, where we educate employers on creating meaningful and impactful benefits. I'm your host, Amanda Brummitt. In this episode, you'll hear from two of the smartest people in the benefits industry, Josh Butler and Bret Brummitt. Josh owns Butler Benefits in Amarillo, is an amazing cook, and a terrible hiker. Bret owns Generous Benefits in Austin, is a whiz at fixing old cars, and lies to Josh about how long the hike will actually be. Josh, Bret, thank you for carving time out of your day, although I know you two like to hang out, so it wasn't a hard ask to get you two to come together and give me an hour of your time to talk about all the lovely things that go on in insurance. So before we get into insurance, though, I want to start with how you guys met, because on paper, you guys should be enemies since you're competitors. So what's the story there?
Man, we actually were quiet enemies, I think. I don't know. Josh was just some yahoo from Panhandle, Texas that I was introduced to through a broker network called Q4 Intelligence that I participate and also work for. But that group brought us together. It's a collaborative group of insurance industry professionals. And I was introduced and they're like, "You're going to like this Josh guy." And I'm like, "Are you sure about that? I don't know that I'm going to like this Josh guy just because we're both from Texas and different degrees of short. I don't think it makes us like each other automatically." So I was very hesitant until meeting Josh. And after about 30 minutes, he really grew on me.
30 minutes. Wow.
Yeah. You're abrasive at front.
Well, I thought 30 minutes was like a record time. I thought most people take at least 2 weeks to warm up to me.
It's like almost love at first sight for someone like you.
It was fun. I mean, I think back in what year was that, Bret? That's been what now, 6 or 7 years ago, close?
I think that's actually prior to like 20. If we were going on 10 years, that's gonna be like 2016, 2017.
Yeah, I think so. So I know it was pre-pandemic for sure, but no, I think that was kind of at the height of the LinkedIn. When everybody started to watch each other on LinkedIn and react to their posts. And I had followed Bret for Amanda. I had followed him for quite some time, and Q4I was something that brought us together initially. But then I just was reading his content and a lot of people's content, and I think then we came to Dallas. My wife and I came to Dallas for some doctor visits, and ended up going to dinner with you guys, and that was the first time that we had met you. But I had met Bret. The first time we met in person, Bret, well, it was at a Q4 conference, wasn't it, in Florida?
Yeah, it was either Florida or maybe even a New Orleans one before that or something.
No,
and it was love at first sight for Allison and I, just to be clear. It didn't take us 30 minutes.
Yeah, so it's been a minute ago.
All right. Well, I think that's super cool that you guys are friends, competitors, but you also share ideas. So, all right, let's dive into it. And Josh, I want to start with you. What are some of the most common schemes or products sold by brokers that you just think really put employers or employees at a disadvantage?
I better not say whole life insurance, because that might be stealing Bret's answer, but I don't know. I think there's schemes and products. I mean, obviously there's schemes that we've seen over the course of our career, and Bret can probably acknowledge this, things that do with using Section 125 plans and, and wellness programs. The IRS has sent out memos. I mean, that's one thing that comes to mind that I think is pretty predatory. And it's a scheme that even the IRS has identified multiple times and addressed with multiple memos. But it's shocking to me that you still see some insurance agents or brokers even out there peddling these types of programs where you deduct something on a pre-tax basis to generate a tax savings, and then you can invest it back into the savings to buy life insurance typically, or some type of, and you get these wellness credits. And so that's one. And then I think from the ancillary world, I think there's a whole lot of abuse that goes on and misinformation that goes on, because a lot of these products carry very heavy commissions, and there's a lot of incentive, there are financial motives for brokers to push products that maybe are a little bit redundant or unnecessary. And so that would be my initial take on it.
Yeah. Okay. And do you want to talk about whole life?
Not really.
Okay.
And that was just, I think it's just kind of an industry joke, about just whole life insurance in general. But no offense to anybody out there that sells whole life products. I know that there are a lot of good whole life products, but anyways, no, we
Yeah.
don't need to go there.
Okay, cool. And then, Brett, are there benefits products or solutions that are commonly pushed despite offering little to no real value?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and I think Josh really hit on it. And I'll even go a little further. Anything that is pitched to a broker as you'll make more money doing this than the other way, there's probably a little something that is not as genuinely useful for the consumer. A high commission product is loaded or designed to pull premium, give the broker to move it, and not pay out a benefit. So really the red flag behind the scenes, the higher commission or the disproportionately higher the commission, probably the worse the product is for the consumer because there's some kind of clawback or provision that's not advantageous for that consumer in the first few years at least. So those anything that gets in that scale, and that can be really well designed, well intentioned products that are used in a unsavory fashion from a sales department. And so I think a lot of things that fall into this category are things that started out to fit a need, but then either had an extended shelf life or had a disproportionate value proposition over time that was really profitable for an insurance company. And they saw a way to move it through a higher commission or, pocket for the broker
Okay.
at that things.
And Brett, can you give us an
yeah.
example? Because I'm just thinking our HR folks and CFOs, they don't necessarily know what you get overcompensated on. So what's an example?
Yeah, products that have front-loaded commission or heaped commission, things where you're getting paid out, 40%, 60% for year one, and then trailing down to like 5% year two. So a lot of worksite products can fall into
Okay.
that category. So your critical illness, your accidents, your gap plans are probably your most common ones that
Mhm.
have a purpose that are deployed in a very icky manner on the back end.
Icky and unsavory.
Yeah. Now, the one that I think has a true, like, at least in Texas and several other states, has absolutely no value for the employee or the employer is the ICHRA. I actually think that the ICHRA is probably the biggest, like, I'd rather see an employer just not offer coverage than offer an ICHRA. Because of the back end product is actually less advantageous and less beneficial and more financially disadvantaged to the member than almost any employer based health plan. So it's a disservice, in my opinion, to the employee to put them on an ICHRA versus just not doing it all. Obviously, there are employer penalties for employer mandates that cause the employers to need to do something like that instead of just sidestepping out of the thing altogether. But it's a real cop out from just designing a good employee or based health plan that could be advantageous for both the company and the employee. So I actually think ICHRAs are probably my top tier, like value less solution in the industry that's super pushed right now. And it generates a high transactional um, PEPM margin for all the administrators and
Per
not
employee
anything.
per month.
Yeah, sorry. It's a middleman compensation vehicle and not a benefit.
Well, I can't disagree, Amanda, with that, but I wanted to comment on the ICHRA
Yeah.
thing because it is a really big hot topic right now, and a lot of people are touting it as a somewhat of a silver bullet to group medical. And trust me when I say this, I understand the frustration, especially smaller employers feel. There's not a whole lot of choice, but I mean, Brett mentioned, here in Texas, I'll just use the Texas Panhandle, the 26 counties up here.
Mhm.
I've done analysis on these individual plans, and we've sold individual coverage in prior years, and we've implemented ICHRAs before just because we are in the industry. We want to know how these vehicles function. We want to know how they operate. But Brett's exactly he's right about this. Is we had a real crisis of conscience with these ICHRAs because if you pair these things and push people into the individual market in the Texas Panhandle, the lowest out of pocket maximum for an individual that you can get on an individual plan is over $7,000 a year.
Oh,
And so, what are we doing to people? I get that from an employer's perspective, they're looking for relief from these high cost health plans, and we understand that. But the alternative is to just ditch your employees into an individual marketplace with $7,000 max out of pockets minimum. And that's the lowest you can get. It is just a big, massive transition of risk to the people who can afford it the least. And so I agree with Brett that there are so many other ways. It requires a whole lot more work, but you can certainly design health plans with much lower out-of-pocket costs than $7,000 a year that still reduce costs for organizations and their employees. But is it readily available to go buy in the marketplace? No, but you have to go build these types of solutions, but it is very, very possible.
Okay, noted. Josh, keep on going. I want to know where you think pharmacy benefit managers fall in this spectrum of predatory and parasitic.
Oh my goodness, man, you're hitting all the hot topics. PBMs. Well, I mean, if you look around, I think the country's found our next common enemy. I think if you look legislatively and politically, I think PBMs are despised by Democrats and Republicans. And so we're starting to see some legislative movement in the country. Arkansas was a state that just passed a law. It was signed by Governor Sanders there in Arkansas just a couple of weeks ago that basically said if a PBM owns a pharmacy as well, so we're going to pick on CVS because they're the most, recognized. CVS Caremark is a PBM, but they also own CVS pharmacies. But Arkansas said if you're a PBM that owns pharmacies, you can't operate as both in the state. Some people are saying you can't own pharmacies. That's not what the bill says. A PBM can own pharmacies in the state of Arkansas, but they can't operate as both a PBM and a pharmacy, so they have to choose. And obviously, we see CVS Caremark has already said that if this law is upheld, that they would probably be shutting down their pharmacy locations. So they're picking the PBM world over the pharmacy world. So from a predatory perspective, absolutely. It's well documented that the big PBMs control about 82% of all the drug transactions in this country, and they have a lot of power and they've got a lot of money. We're talking about the largest corporations in America, and all of the schemes and the way drugs are bought and sold. Employers would do well if they could learn one thing about healthcare. It is the financial transactions that exist and how we acquire and procure drugs. That alone is costing our country trillions of dollars. It's with a T. So I would definitely say we need to do more in the PBM space to work with truly transparent and pass-through PBMs and keep pressuring our elected officials. I do think that we need consumer protection in that area.
Yeah. Okay. So transparent PBMs. So there are good PBMs. It's just there's a lot that maybe there's not very much transparency to their transactions.
I think there's
Conflicts.
PBMs that are much much more aligned with the interest of plan sponsors and their employees than others. I don't know if I would go so far as to say I think there are good PBMs. That's not true. There are good PBMs out there that truly are transparent. They have pass-through models, and they are very transparent with the way they make their money. And then there's some PBMs that simply aren't, and it's a big difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Josh, how do you know when your PBM that is good is going south, and you need to look at bailing ship?
I don't know. I've done a lot of reading and research on that, and I look at where PBMs can make healthy margins with still being 100% transparent and pass through, where they're not generating revenue streams off spread pricing or rebates. And so, looking at an organization's administration fee or their fill fees, if they charge a specific amount per fill. I think the admin fee is if you get below probably $7 on an admin fee, that PBM's probably making money somewhere else, or they're not going to be very financially viable. So just kind of keeping a close eye on their administrative pricing structure is one way to kind of make sure that your PBM partner is making money. We don't want, that we need our partners to make money, but also looking at the other end of, are you truly passing through rebates and eliminating generic spread, and all of these other areas where PBMs make grotesque amounts of money, that's allowed to pass back through to your client, the plan sponsor.
Yeah. And Brett, as long as we're talking about how you can tell the difference on things, let's talk about brokers. There are some predatory and parasitic brokers out there. Sorry, guys, Brett and Josh are brokers, if I wasn't clear about that in the beginning. How can an employer tell if their broker is acting in their best interest or is just, trying to sell them what pays them the most? And talk about disclosures and how those come into play, and can you manipulate those?
Ooh, can you manipulate those?
Mm.
Well, yes, absolutely, you can. Everything can be manipulated, but let's start back at the biggest part and the intent of how to tell the difference.
Yeah.
I think any broker worth their salt knows what they're getting paid when they work with an employer.
Yeah.
There is no reason not to have that conversation up front before you start working with an employer about how your compensation works. There's no reason for an employer to buy a product without knowing what compensation that product has. So I think if the broker is forthcoming in I'll say genuine way, which there can be some very disingenuous ways of coming forward and doing this, but it's rare enough that during that prospecting pre-client or even at renewal, like product transition conversation, that the compensation is talked about in the same vein or even before the price of a product. If those are happening up front, I would say you're probably in a good percentage chance being up there. And now we are also required as brokers these days, anytime a vendor, or we're not actually required, the employer is required to know the compensation being paid, at least on their health plan side, for anything where they're paying a vendor more than $1,000 a year. So most employers in America are paying their broker more than $1,000 a year, in most cases, unless you're just tiny.
And if they're not doing that, Brett, if they're not doing that, it's
Mhm.
not the broker that is
No.
out of compliance. It's the employer that's out of compliance. And I found that interesting in the
Mhm.
Consolidated Appropriations Act, that the onus is not put on the broker to disclose their compensation and revenue. The onus is put back on the employer to make sure the broker is disclosing the compensation and revenue streams. So at the end of the day, all roads and responsibilities lead back to that plan sponsor.
Yeah, which is, again, how do you know the good broker? The broker that knows those pitfalls for the employer and helps them avoid them. I mean, much like your
Yeah.
pre-tax documents, your ERISA wraps, your PCORI fees, all the other things that come along with healthcare compliance. If they're having that, if they just have the compensation disclosure program built into their regular workflows, it's a broker that's at least on top of their game.
Yep.
And so I think that's probably really the first way. The other thing I would say is if a broker is just way too hot and happy about a specific solution over the other ones, like this is the best thing in the market right now, that broker has been, maybe for good, bad intentions or bad intentions, they've been sold
Right.
a sales pitch and don't have the both sides of the coin of the good and the bad of a specific product to be able to give a balanced overview. So again, I would say one, if the compensation disclosure upfront is talked about in a very holistic manner with an employer, and then two, like how zealous is that broker pushing it? If they're over pushing it, they're definitely pushing it for their own interest. Even if it's not monetarily, they might just be overexcited. And I think I would be wary of that as an employer.
Or getting a vacation or a bonus.
That's
I get
true.
excited about vacations and bonuses.
Can we tell a story here, Amanda?
Yeah, tell a story.
Oh my gosh, because we recently did an analysis for a municipality, a large municipality in Texas. Um, and just first, I want to make a distinction, like especially from the big brokerage firms. There is a very big distinction between a producer at a large firm, and I'm not going to name any large firms. We all know who they are, and producers and brokers that work at those firms versus the firm itself and the organization. So sometimes the actual broker that may be working with a client is not being compensated in these ways, but the firm is. And so I think it's important to delineate there that we're not saying that just because it's your broker doing this, you could work with the broker at a very large firm that is a straight as an arrow, a great consultant, great broker, but it's the firm they work for that is participating in some of these revenue streams that Brett and I are discussing. But I'll tell a story, and here's an example. In this analysis and audit we did for this municipality, we discovered that the firm, the brokerage firm, probably not the individual broker that that entity works with, was receiving $7 a claim from a PBO. That is a pharmacy benefit optimizer. They're like a middleman for a middleman. They pay brokers to place business with specific PBMs. And so this firm was getting paid $7 a claim, and in that particular municipality, there were 50,000 claims in the previous year. So you just take 50,000 prescription dispensations times $7, and we're talking about $350,000 of undisclosed compensation that that firm, not necessarily the individual broker, remember that, was earning by placing business with a specific PBM. And I won't name the PBM either. But this is extremely common in our industry that employers are unaware of, largely unaware of. And so when we were picking on PBMs a little bit ago, and now we've transitioned to brokers, they work harmoniously. Many of them work hand in glove, because this is the thing that stifles innovation in our industry. It's not because these large firms and these large PBMs are not smart people. They're brilliant, brilliant people. It's a matter of misaligned incentives, and there's a lot of money being made in our industry too, in the broker world, that is typically undisclosed to the very people we work for. And that needs to, I think it needs to come, maybe not stop. If the client agrees that allows the broker to make $350,000 from the PBM, then fine. But I think that the market's going to dictate that, and the only way it can is for there to be a light shown on these types of revenue streams.
Yeah. Yeah, Josh, you bring up a really good point too. And I know that we haven't talked about this out loud, but I know that you guys care about all this because you'd rather see that $350,000 going into raises for the employer's employees, retirement, or just reducing the costs. So, what should employers be asking their broker, or any new vendor for that matter, to make sure that they're not getting into one of those situations or getting taken advantage of?
Well, I'm going to pick up where Brett left off. The number one thing they can be asking is what's required by the Consolidated Appropriations Act, is asking for those full direct and indirect compensation disclosures at minimum on an annual basis. And so asking those types of questions: how do you get paid? And disclose full disclosure. And if you don't suspect that your broker is being 100% forthcoming, you can go to the PBM or to the insurance carrier, and you can request it from them. Are you compensating my broker in any way? And they're obligated to release that information as well. So if there is, if you feel like, hey, the broker wasn't honest with me, you can always kind of go and do a double check with the carrier or the PBM or the stop loss carrier to ask, is my broker receiving any direct or indirect compensation on our business?
And I know Josh mentions the CAA, or the Consolidated Appropriations Act. The coolest thing about that is an upfront requirement versus traditionally for a larger employer, the Schedule A disclosures are like they're 7 months trailing after the fact. So as an employer, you really can't do much when you don't really know about it till a year and a half after you sign an agreement. Not cool from a purchasing holistic scenario. So the CAA really flipped that script, and now that's more, I mean, and even though it's the employer's responsibility, it's the employer's responsibility because it's designed to make the employer a true fiduciary and good steward of their plan, and which is why it's their responsibility. And so that's why the cool part of that flipped it to being something that has to be required to be, if you're doing a good job as a fiduciary, upfront pre-purchase.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, Amanda. The second part of my answer would be, what could you be asking your broker?
Yeah.
Ask non-traditional questions like, take me to PBM school. Teach me how PBMs make money. Take me into your world. Tell me how brokers actually make money. Tell me how consulting firms and big brokerage firms make all this money. There are huge companies. Teach me about the industry. Teach me the business. Don't just come in here and show me a product and say, this is the one we think you should buy. employers have to go a little bit deeper, in my opinion. And the ones that do are the ones that start to get educated and they don't fall into these traps because now they understand the business, they know what questions to ask. And this is particularly important to public sector employers that have
Mm.
a heightened fiduciary responsibility. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their plan and their employees, but they also have a huge fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers in their communities. And going to school on this topic, because it is a topic, healthcare and healthcare finance and health insurance, these are largely still an issue that we find employers are not very educated on. Now, there are some that are, but by and large, they are not. And they will admit it. They say, we hate this industry. We don't want to talk about, but they got to get over that. And they need to start asking. And if their broker can't educate them or their advisor or consultant can't educate them on the industry in a transparent way, I think that's a big red flag too.
Yeah. If they get squirrely and aren't excited about having that conversation, like you two obviously are, it's red flag.
Well, I love it, but I'll tell you what, it's a double-edged sword because when you start to educate clients in that way, man, I'm going to tell you what happens, and Brett can, I would love to hear his take on this too. They get out their microscopes and then they start looking at every little thing, right? As before, when ignorance is bliss, right? And so before they knew all of these insider information and things like that, they didn't even know what to look for. Now they've got their telescopes out and they're looking at every little thing, and that can prompt a whole lot more questions and a whole lot more criticisms even, and maybe that's what some brokers are afraid of. But we're certainly not. We like to educate our clients and let them know how this industry works, and because it's a huge spend, and it's 22% of our GDP now, so it's getting worse. So the employers need to get educated.
Yeah. So, Brett, if an employer suspects they've bought something that benefits the broker more than the people that work at the company, what steps can they take to get out of it and protect themselves moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so we're in probably the golden age, and I would say maybe even in the last 10 year of the good times for self-funded health insurance plans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so a lot of employers have moved to some form of self-funded plan, and its caveats. Those actually allow for compensation to the broker to be changed any given month. So let's say I think my broker's being overcharged. I'm working with that arrangement. So those things are modifiable mid-year. There are also other plans that they've been sold something that may not be working. Like, what are the terms to get out of it? And also, what are the adverse effects that might come back as the employer responsibility? Because those things tend to have some kind of clause for if you end early, there can be some responsibilities of
Sure.
fees and add-ons and pains. I mean, so knowing what your contract said, which in this age of quick sign, docu-sign contracts and not really reading the whole thing, I would say a lot of both brokers and employers are bad about not reading all of those pages. It's probably always been the case, but looking through those, knowing where to do those, look through those, figuring out what those clauses were. I mean, if the employer doesn't have access to the contracts they signed, that's not a good situation.
But not shocking.
Not shocking. And they've been given access probably through some of the DocuSign electronic signature stuff. They may have just not downloaded, saved at the right spot. If the broker can't produce those pretty quickly, that's probably a bad sign, either of bad processes or maybe somebody trying to hide something. Those things are going to be there. So you do want to look at the contracts. The contracts are always available. The vendors can always send the contracts back to you directly. I mean, really looking at that is the first step, but then kind of having that second opinion, like, is this such a bad thing for us? We did this because of this. We're not getting the results. And honestly, just having the conversation with the broker in the first place, are we getting the results we intended here? I mean, because brokers live on an advice and a results business, and we should be totally available to have the conversation of what are the results we're getting for what we've purchased. That should be something that, if it's not being had already, should just always be a good, mid-year, every 3 months, kind of frequency available conversation. And that's probably the best first step to protect yourself. Are we getting the results we expected? And a lot of times these things are put in place, left for years. They've exceeded their time limit. And all of a sudden, employers are still paying for things they bought 3 and 4 years ago. And they find out that they're spending their money, they're spending their employees' money on it. And it hasn't given hardly the return that they've put in on it. And not even by far. I'm saying some of these programs, they've paid in, 90% and only paid out 5. Very disproportionate programs on some of the things.
Yeah.
And then what about protecting themselves moving forward?
I mean, I think that's back to Josh's point of get involved in learning about the product in the industry with the broker, having good education. I mean, protecting yourself moving forward is about educating. And I don't think it's always the, president, CEO, CFO's responsibility. I think this falls a lot into the HR's responsibility of being educated. Like they've got a lot to deal with on just the personal performance education aspect of it. And there's a lot in the benefits and the different benefits, especially anything that has to do with employees' money, investment, savings. How is that impacting the employee? How is that impacting their overall take-home pay, their pocketbook, their savings, their financial aptitude? A lot of that goes to the employee's like whole performance. And so having that education around any product that involves employee money, and I'm defining employee money as things the employees pay for, things the employer pays for, and things the employee doesn't get compensated on in forms of wages and take-home pay and job quality because the employer is spending it on a product that is not going back directly to the employee's pocket.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, a question for both of you. Our final question. If you had just one piece of advice you could give employers related to predatory and parasitic benefit practices, what would it be?
Brett, you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I mean, y'all go first. What things can you live without at your company? Like have your hierarchy of needs for your employee workforce. Like what's most important? What do you want those employees to have as a result of your relationship as the employer when they leave you 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now? And do your benefits align with those objectives? So, for me, I don't want anyone walking away from here without some form of savings. So are they given the ability to save money? Is there a retirement plan in place? Do they have a disability plan in place in case they can't work? Even though I sell and make most of our money off of health insurance, that is actually second on my hierarchy of needs.
For your own employees?
For my own employees. And so that how I fund those items around cash-based accounts, retirement savings, income protection, and also employee education for their future roles, either in our company or outside. Those are reflected more in our benefits. However, strategically, I also contribute things that I know will have long-term effects on their health. And that's why we do some of the innovative things we do around the health plan to fund those at a higher level and reward our employees for making the decisions that put them on the right track forward. So I would say do that. What's your goal for your employees when they leave you, whether that's retirement or just their next job, and back into your benefits hierarchy of needs from there.
I like that. Brett. So final piece of advice for employers. Well, I already talked about getting educated, so I'm not going to use that. That's something that we've already said employers need to do. I think the one piece of advice I would give employers is for them to raise their expectations of their broker. That we're not just, a good broker is not just transactional, or they shouldn't be. Historically, you may look at a broker as just somebody that is a seller's agent. You're here to sell me a product from an insurance company. And that's kind of like, it's just, that's a very low bar to cross. Anybody can go sell a product. So that would be my biggest thing is raise your expectations. And then one of those would be like a tangible example would be add self-funding to your conversation. I don't care what size of group you are. I don't care if you think we've done that before and it didn't work out. Listen, self-funding is like it's a vehicle, right? It's like a high performance vehicle. Let's call it a Lamborghini. And if I put my 14-year-old son behind the wheel of a Lamborghini, somebody's going to get hurt, and it's probably going to be him. The vehicle, though, is not the problem. It might be somebody driving the vehicle is the problem. Because to me, in the world of risk, which is what insurance is all about, there's not a better model if you want to try to control your costs. It's the only way I know to do it. You have to be in the right vehicle, but you have to raise the expectations of your broker and what they're capable of doing for you, besides selling you a product. Because you don't even need a broker to buy a product. You can go directly to Blue Cross Blue Shield without a broker and buy the exact same health insurance plans that they're selling you, and you're going to save 6% because there ain't going to be any broker commission in it. So the value of a broker is not in our ability to sell a product. Okay. But I think that's how a lot of brokers are treated. And that's just the level of expectations that many employers have of a broker, is just to sell them products. And I think that is a little short-sighted, and they're missing out on a huge upside, because a broker can be extremely valuable to a company of any size if the incentives are aligned, and you've got the right one working for you.
Fabulous. Well, thank you both again for your time. Thanks for caring. I feel like you two have a pretty high level of not a pretty high, you have a very high level of ethics, but you're also, I actually care about what happens to the employee meter is super high, and dictates the way both of you work together and push each other and your other friends in the industry to be better and to be more transparent. So thank you both.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yep.
That's a wrap on this episode of Generous Benefits Podcast. Huge thanks to Josh Butler and Bret Brummitt for pulling back the curtain on some of the parasitic and predatory practices lurking in the benefits world. And more importantly, for sharing how employers can protect themselves and their employees.